Good morning, and welcome to a Moss Adams webcast. I'm Katie Soderberg, the webcast producer for today's presentation, Stay Ahead of Cybersecurity Breaches and Off the Media's Radar. I'm pleased to introduce you to our presenters for today's session. Kevin Villanueva has been in the technology field since 1997 and leads the firm's information security and infrastructure practice. He has extensive experience conducting information security assessments, disaster recovery planning, strategic technology planning, and penetration testing. Troy Hawes has over 20 years of IT experience and is the firm's lead ethical hacker, regularly performing penetration testing and vulnerability assessment engagements. He has experience leading IT security assessments, IT compliance audits, including PCI DSS, HIPAA, and SSA 16 audits, and disaster recovery planning. Our moderator today will be Francis Tam. Francis has practiced public accounting and consulting since 1994. He has extensive experience providing IT audit and internal control guidance to public and private companies through engagements including payment card industry security, cybersecurity assessments, and business process reengineering. So with that said, I'm going to turn the webcast over to Francis to get things started. Francis, the webcast is now in your hands.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for everybody for attending our webcast on cybersecurity. So we're looking at a list of the participants. We have a variety of folks on the webcast today, from the CFO type, the financial type, the CIO type. So hopefully everybody will get some takeaway from this webcast. By no means we're trying to turn you into a IT auditor, but hopefully this will give you a lot of ideas and suggestions on how you can protect yourself in this cybersecurity space. So the learning objectives today is to give you some tactics in terms of helping you to minimize the threat of a data security breach. And also, number two is looking at the third-party service providers, how they can conform to your organization's data security requirements. And then lastly but not least, how can you prepare if you're unfortunately enough to suffer from a cybersecurity breach? How can you prepare for an aftermath of a cybersecurity breach? So in terms of the agenda, we want to take you through the cycle of a cybersecurity breach. So we will talk about, some of the latest incidents of a breach, why they happen, what is the cause of a breach. Maybe it's dollar amount, maybe it's a reputation, and Kevin will talk about that in a few minutes. How can you draft up an incident response plan when you have an incident? And how can you minimize the risk of a breach? And lastly, how can you build a data breach checklist to better prepare in the future if you happen to have one, you don't have to scramble, and you can follow this checklist to go through the data breach itself. And then lastly, we'll give you a chance to to ask some questions, and if you have any issues that you want to bring up to us. Without further delay, I'll turn it over to you, Kevin, to start going over our presentation. Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Francis, and good morning, everybody. For the first few slides, I kind of want to set the stage of what's happening in the world today in terms of cybersecurity and data breaches. So we turn to actually a report from Verizon. It's a 2015 Data Breach Investigations Report. And what Verizon had done here is they collected data from approximately 70 organizations involved with either looking into cybersecurity incidents or having been victim of a cybersecurity incident themselves. And so what they've done is they collected data on about 80,000 incidents and about 2,100 actual breaches. And so I pulled out some of the interesting facts that came out of that study. And the first one here, cyber attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated, but many criminals still rely on decades-old techniques such as phishing and hacking. That struck me kind of interesting because increasingly sophisticated to me means that they're using a number of different ways to attack a network or a system, such as using botnets, injecting malware, using social engineering attacks. And yet the majority of these cases that were looked at, they use just regular spear phishing attacks using like fake emails, or actual trying to hack into a system using maybe like brute force password attacks or that kind of thing. So I found that pretty interesting. Second bullet, attackers are able to compromise an organization within minutes in over 60% of the breaches. That's astonishing. So if you think about some of the techniques that are being used, most likely a lot of these compromises are a result of the human factor getting compromised. So I bet you a lot of social engineering comes into play when and contributes to that high percentage of breaches. This third bullet, 83% of security incidents by industry involve the top 3 data breach causes. So number 1 being point-of-sale intrusion. So you might recall that from like the Target and the Home Depot attacks of Home Depot when they got attacked in 2014. Crimeware, which is just essentially programs that help facilitate illicit activity. And then you got cyber espionage. So this one's really interesting. In fact, I've read an article today about the St. Louis Cardinals of the Major League Baseball organization. They're being investigated by the FBI for actually hacking into a database owned by the Houston Astros. So, if it's not nation states and corporations conducting cyber espionage, now you got sports teams getting into the fray and joining the party. So we can see that probably increase as time goes on. And then this last one, in more than a quarter of the breaches, it takes a victim weeks or even months to contain the breach. So there's that lag between realizing that you've been breached and then, understanding how the breach happened and actually trying to contain it and isolate the impact. And then, of course, going on to remediation efforts. So that's pretty scary when you think about the time it takes to actually figure out what's going on when you have been breached. So let's take a look at really the worst breaches of the 21st century. And this is kind of really a hall of shame, so to speak, as far as cybersecurity breaches, with basically all of these happening in the last decade, the last 10 years. So for you gamers out there, the Sony PlayStation Network, that breach happened in 2011, where 77 million customer records were actually stolen as a result of a database getting compromised. And then you have, I mentioned the Home Depot one, where 56 million card transactions actually were compromised back in 2014 when their point-of-sale system got breached. And then I think the most interesting one was RSA Security. This happened in March of 2011 when code associated with their secure ID token, it's a two-factor authentication program, actually got breached, and some are speculating that it's due to a phishing attack. And I think the cost of that particular attack has cost RSA Security about $66 million from latest reports. So it's astonishing that even a specialized company that specializes in cybersecurity and cybersecurity protections actually gets breached and gets some sensitive information taken from them. So it's definitely a different world we live in from 10 years ago. So really, when you think about it, why the surge in breaches? Well, simply put, it's just very profitable for these cyber criminals. In fact, doing a little bit of research, I found that a medical record alone is worth $50 on the black market, and there are multiple black markets on the internet for these cyber criminals to really trade wares and trade data that's been stolen. In contrast to that, a credit card account number ranges anywhere from 50 cents to $30 per account number, and then a social security number really drops down to about $1. So why are medical records a longer term play than credit cards? If you think about it, if your credit card gets compromised, it's really a matter of you calling your bank and saying, hey, there's some fraudulent activity on my card that I've seen. Could you please go ahead and block this card, or basically send me a new card and discontinue this one, and then that's done and over with. An attacker can't use that card anymore for any of their purposes. But a medical record, if you think about it, that has a lot of information. That's a treasure trove for cyber criminals, in that it could contain your social security number, your date of birth, address. Your bank account information, if possible, sometimes diagnoses and other sensitive information like that, as well as like income information. So, this is really a ton of information for an attacker to use for medical ID fraud, filing a false tax claim, or like a tax return rather, doing identity theft. So really, that's why medical records are a lot more now. Credit cards, in contrast, it's cheaper, but it's a lot easier for attackers to get access to the equipment to make fake credit card or debit cards. In fact, card cloners, if you look on the internet, you can actually find them from anywhere between $200 to $1,000 just for the unit to actually make those false credit cards. So it's pretty astonishing how easy it is for a cyber criminal to really get in the business and get going. There's really seemingly a low barrier to entry. So in these next few slides, I'm going to just talk about some of the major breaches of the 21st century, just touch upon them and kind of give a little context and maybe figure out, exactly, how they happened or what possibly could have happened to them. So this first one, Heartland Payment Systems. So Heartland Payment Systems, they are a payment card processing company, one of the largest in the nation. They actually got breached in March of 2008, where 134 million credit and debit card records were exposed and stolen by a gang led by Albert Gonzalez. And Albert Gonzalez, he was really the mastermind and spearheaded the gang that was involved with that TGX Companies attack involving TJ Maxx and Marshalls and those affiliated companies back in 2007. So he is really, back then he was a 23-year-old hacker, and what they did is they compromised the wireless network and did a SQL injection attack in order to access a database containing information, cardholder information. And this was back in the TJX Companies attack. This Heartland Payment Systems attack, same type of attack took place. They used that same SQL injection vulnerability, and the astonishing thing is that SQL injection vulnerability was actually known. It was out in the wild, and there's already been a patch for it for some time, and yet the administrators of those systems did not patch in a timely manner, and as a result, that vulnerability got essentially taken advantage of. So it's really a shame because, it costs a lot of money. In fact, look at the cost of breach there is $140 million. So that really put a damper and a dent into Heartland Payment Systems after that particular breach.
Hey, Kevin. I want to chime in on this one here, because this one has a unique characteristics to it, because going back to the Heartland one, they hit that company in 2008. The same gang hit the same company in 2012 again. So the two things that I pick up from this breach is that they are not afraid to hit the same company twice. Number two is they are very patient. So in this case, they waited 4 more years before they hit them again. So in 2012, they organized a group of people and cash out what we call the debit card cash out scheme in 2012, and they got somewhere around $25 million worldwide. So this is two things that we learned from these hackers. They are very patient. Yeah. Number one, they're not afraid to hit the same company a second time.
And that's actually a good point, Francis, because actually I just read an article in Forbes just recently that on May 31st that one of Heartland's offices in Santa Ana, I believe, had experienced a physical security breach where the attackers stole a number of computers containing information on their customers, and so it's an ongoing investigation. They don't know exactly what all has been taken, but they've been hit hard recently in terms of the number of breaches that they've experienced. Interesting enough, though, and I forgot to mention this back on that slide, is Heartland Payment Systems, they were actually certified as being PCI DSS compliant. And so for those of you that are merchants or service providers that take in credit or debit cards, you should know what PCI DSS is, or Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And just because they were certified as compliant, obviously they weren't secure. So compliance with PCI DSS does not mean the same as being secured against hacks and breaches and that kind of thing. Target, I just want to touch upon this real quick. So I think we all remember this one. In a span of 17 days back in December of 2013, after starting on Black Friday, Target got hacked into. Their point-of-sale system was hacked into using malicious code that was actually injected into the point-of-sale system. About 110 million transactions or records were compromised during that 17-day time span. And as a result, Target here is paying has paid about 162 million as far as the total cost of the breach. And so you can think of that as any type of credit monitoring, any type of remediation efforts they've made on their systems, any type of lawsuits that have come their way. So it's pretty interesting in this one, because what had happened is their HVAC vendor, actually login credentials for the HVAC vendor, those were the ones that were compromised. And the HVAC vendor had access to Target's network at the time, and unfortunately that HVAC vendor apparently did not have good internal controls, perhaps related to securing clients' passwords. And as a result, those login credentials were stolen. Attackers got into the point-of-sale system using the HVAC vendor's login information, and as a result, we have one of the worst breaches of the 21st century. So, maybe as a precursor to this actual breach, maybe Target could have done more. Maybe they could have done additional audits against that HVAC vendor, making sure they had certain internal controls in place. They could have requested that the HVAC vendor undergo some type of data security audit, like an ISO 27001 audit, something like that, to make sure that they actually had good controls in place for protecting client information and client data. This attack involved taking data off of the magnetic stripe. Hopefully the EMV chip that will come into effect and be widely adopted back in October of this year will hopefully resolve a lot of these issues. And then lastly, Anthem. This is just very recent. It's an ongoing investigation. How this breach actually happened that involved almost 80 million current and former customers. It's still unclear yet, because all that is known that it was a very sophisticated external attack. Supposedly no medical information about customers and former customers got released, but it's still an ongoing investigation, and the cost of this breach is expected to exceed $100 million. So pretty astonishing. So what are the industries affected by breaches? Well, in this case, we took this information from another study by weve, and the top three actually were retail, food and beverage, and hospitality. It's interesting. Why do you think these three would be up there as far as the top three industries affected? Well, largely has to do with a lot of these types of businesses, retail, food and beverage, and hospitality. They may be running just like a mom and pop operation. They may not be as sophisticated from a security standpoint or security awareness standpoint as some of larger corporations or larger companies. And as a result, they're really low-hanging fruit for a lot of these cyber criminals. And so, retail, food and beverage, and hospitality, I think those will always be at least in the top 7 or so as far as the industries that get affected, just because they are often cases a lot less sophisticated in terms of their cyber protections. So what are the top causes of data breaches? Again, this came from that Verizon report. Point of sale intrusions, that took top as far as the incidents at almost 29%. And then you had crimeware, which is close to about 19%, and then cyber espionage at 18%. And these other ones, I won't go through the rest of this list, but I mean, as you can see, various causes of data breaches and different ways or different attack vectors for a cyber criminal to come into an organization and steal sensitive information. With that, we have our first polling question, and I'll go ahead and read this off, Katie. So true or false, if my organization experiences a data security breach, I feel we are well prepared to respond. We'll give a few minutes there. Okay, Let's see. Oh, pretty split here. So 41.7% said true, and a little bit more than 58% said false. And not so much a surprise there, just because, you know, keeping real on top of cybersecurity protections and incident response plans, that's just an ongoing effort. And so, you know, it's something that needs to be a living process within an organization, really, to keep up with all the changes and all the cybersecurity issues that are out there today. And so this really doesn't surprise me. In this next section, we're going to talk about the cost of a breach, and really kind of look into how you can quantify the actual cost if a record gets compromised. So again, this is taken from Verizon. They developed actually this cost model, and the old model for really determining the cost of a breach record was actually pretty flawed, because if you think about it, the cost per record for a data breach was really calculated by dividing the sum of all loss estimates by the number of records lost. So $100,000 total loss, and if you lose 1,000 records, then that comes out to be about $100 per record. Well, this old way did not really account for seriously large breaches involving millions of records, where the cost per record could really drop down to about $1 a record. So if you think about the ones that I just talked about, it's really quite a difference between the millions of records that we're seeing that are getting compromised these days. And so what Verizon did is they actually added a weighting system, a confidence weighting system was added to really bring that cost per record estimate more in line with reality. So as you see here in this graph, for example, according to their model, a breach involving, like, for example, 10 million records is expected to have an average loss forecasted to be between 2.1 million and 5.2 million. So really their model here accounts for a larger breaches that happen today. This next slide kind of gives you an average, and it's just a different way of looking at how the model works. So, the expected cost per breach, or expected loss per breach based on the number of records, is shown right there in that middle column. And so what they did is they provided an average on the upper range, an average on the lower range, and really a prediction as far as total cost based on a high number or prediction, and then a lower number. So, you can see with like 1 million records lost on the high end, we could estimate that 500,000 is going to be essentially the top end dollar amount for expected loss based on the number of records. This other slide is just another way, or another example of looking at it. I won't go into this, but it's essentially kind of giving you an understanding of a different way of looking at their model. So again, with a 10 million records loss, that could range anywhere from 2.1 million to 5.2 million, but could range as high as 73.9 million. So that's just an example to throw out there, and this is based on a 95% confidence rating. So that's what they gathered from all that data that they collected. So really, what are kind of some of the mistakes a company makes after a breach? And I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I just want to touch upon a few of them. Number one being no external agencies secured. So external agencies who might have more specialization or expertise in investigating breaches, they're not brought into the conversation early enough, or not at all. So, for example, if your IT staff is trying to figure out what happened during a breach, they may not have that knowledge or skill set in-house, and so bringing in outside expertise at an early enough time to help investigate, that might be one of the best things you could do after a breach. No engagement with outside counsel. So if you're in an industry that's subject to data security regulation, like, for example, with HIPAA and healthcare, or if you're subject to like PCI DSS, knowing what your obligations are in terms of, notifying business partners, notifying your customers about the breach, notifying other stakeholders, that's going to be critical as far as understanding what your obligations are for notifying outside parties about a breach occurrence. Waiting for the perfect information before acting. So a lot of times, when a breach occurs, there's a lot of head scratching going on. Trying to figure out, okay, what exactly happened? How can this be pieced together so we understand exactly how an attacker got in, and really trying to collect all that information without really taking action and trying to, piece it together before acting. That's one of the worst things you can do after a breach, because in the meantime, other damage could be happening. The breach, particularly if it involves viruses, could still be propagating, taking information, that kind of thing. And so really, you need to really act a little bit more timely. And then, failing to practice. So, if you do have an incident response plan, not understanding how to go about carrying out that incident response plan in the aftermath of a breach is going to be critical. If you fail to practice, then everybody's not going to know what their roles are or their responsibilities, and it could end up to being a worse situation than it needs to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Troy Hawes, and he's going to cover incident response.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So first off, let's basically just have a definition of incident response. So the big thing that incident response is having basically an organized process to find out what is happening during a possible breach or an incident, with the goal to minimize the time and cost to recover those systems and be functioning again. So the main thing that we want for our incident response plan is to have good policies and procedures in place that identify all the things that need to occur during an actual incident. So, Katie, I'll let you go ahead and read the question.
Great, thanks, Troy. So our second polling question asks, does your organization have an incident response plan that has been formalized and communicated to employees? So we've got another simple yes or no question here. I'll give you about a minute to submit your responses. And as you're doing so, just a reminder that we do need participation in polling questions in order to award you CPE today. So please select yes or no and then click the submit button to send your response. Okay, we'll close the poll in about 5 seconds here. Great. Thank you all for participating, and back to you, Troy.
All right, well, thank you. The main thing that we see is that not everybody has an incident response plan in place, and that's normal. We see that with a lot of our organizations, and that's why we're here today, kind of find out what do we need from incident response plan. So with that, we definitely need to discuss why it's important. And the main thing there is a number of states and federal laws have breach notification laws. And what that means is that if there is a breach of personally identifiable information or protected health information, there has to be notification to those people that are affected. And as far as like all the states, but Alabama, New Mexico, and South Dakota currently are the only ones that don't have a notification law. Other countries like the European Union, Canada, other countries also have breach notification laws on hand. So if you're doing business with different countries, then you're going to have to know their laws. Things like HIPAA, for example, definitely has breach notification laws and response times that need to be developed. and put in place if there is a breach of protected health information. Also, most security best practices and frameworks from PCI that Kevin mentioned earlier to ISO and NIST, all of these have different incident response plans and procedures that to help organizations develop and respond to incidents. And the main thing that we're driving here is that the response to an incident will affect sales or damage to reputation, fines. We're trying to minimize those as much as possible by having a dedicated or a good response plan in place so that we can minimize any downtime or issues with our response. So what does the life cycle of an incident response actually look like? So first off, there's the preparation phase, and this is where we educate users, IT, other personnel as necessary on what are the tools, what are the security controls and in place, and then how do we report or talk about a security incident? Is there a process in place for employees or customers even to report suspected breaches or incidents? And once we've prepared, then we've got kind of this detection and analysis phase where we're actually identifying, do we actually have a breach in place? Is there a problem, or do we need to go into the next phase as far as containing a possible breach? So we're definitely trying to detect and analyze, and then if we find something, we find an issue, then we go into containing and removing the issue and recovering the system so that we're back into full production once again. And once we've gone through this whole life cycle, then we've got a review process at the end of the incident is to review our incident response plan and ensure that it's been updated or it worked properly. What did we learn from that incident or plan, and what do we need to do? What do we need to do now? So kind of our whole process in place is to go through each of those areas and figure out, do we have a breach or not? Figure out, do we need to identify a group of people to respond to the incident, and what is their response going to be like? Do they need to notify users, customers, other stakeholders, and do they need to collect evidence? So all of these types of things are going to be important to describe and have in your incident response plan. So this is a great slide to show that there's a lot of people involved in the incident response, and it all comes down to pointing to this incident response team that is communicating and identifying and working with all these other groups as they respond to an incident. So we need to have all personnel know about our incident response processes, but we also need to know, do we need to let other people know, whether it's law enforcement, media, or our vendors, about our response or how we're handling an incident.
Yeah, good point. I want to chime in here, Troy. This is a very good way that a lot of people ask, why do we have to involve different people in departments? So just so you know, everybody on the line, because in these days, cybersecurity is not only involving IT. As we mentioned before, a lot of people, hackers-wise, they get in through maybe social engineering, maybe not totally computer, digital or whatever way to get in. They will try to sweet-talk your people to give out secret information, sensitive information. So that would be something you probably want to get involved. For example, your internal people and say, hey, make sure you don't leak out anything. Or if you did, this is how you would kind of close the loop. And then, of course, when it comes to containment, when it comes to forensic, you got to look at the entire footprint, all the footprints that the hackers have traversed, and make sure you close all the loops. You don't want to lose. You don't want to let any holes uncover and let them come back in maybe in a few months. Like I mentioned before, many of these guys are very patient. They're not going to be only hit you once and then give up. They will be very patient and hit you again maybe in a year or two if they see a way that, I got something last time, I will put it in my notepad, I'll try again in 6 months or a year. Back to you, Troy.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Francis. And as we see on this slide, it's just another representation of the multitude of different agencies or vendors, customers, things that you need to think about in the incident response plan, people that you may need to communicate with during the recovery efforts. So one of the things that we always get asked is, how do we know if we've been hacked? What are we looking for? So there are a number of technical controls that should be in place at your organization to help monitor and detect possible intrusions. So some of those things like intrusion detection, data leakage, these types of systems help monitor and control potential intrusions into the environment. They also produce a lot of information in logs, and so you need these log analysis tools and correlation tools to review the logs of information to really identify, do we actually have a breach? And if we have a breach, when did it happen? So if we're not keeping these logs or information, then we're not going to have that knowledge. We're not going to know how they got in or where they got in. How do we respond then, or how do we protect our system? Some of the other kind of what I call technical controls is to just know what types of sensitive information you have. And once you have that information, if you need it, then use encryption or tokenization or some sort of method to make sure that that data is secure, whether it's being stored and or when it's transmitted. Some of the other pieces to think about when you're thinking about your incident response plan is you also have to make sure your users know how to use it. So there's going to be training for IT staff or the team that is responsible for responding to an incident, but there's also the personnel awareness training. So how do personnel know what an incident might look like? Do they know what a virus outbreak might look like and could respond or help out or notify IT of a specific issue? So it's important to make sure that we're getting everybody knowledge about the information needed. The other thing is to make sure that you're testing and looking at your controls, your security controls, whether through an audit of some sort, like a penetration testing or a security assessment, and making sure that the security controls you do have in place are actually operating effectively. Okay, let you go to the polling question number 3.
Great, thanks, Troy. So our third polling question asks, if my organization experienced a data breach, we would know what our breach notification obligations are to our customers. So in essence, we've got another yes or no question. First option is yes, we know exactly who to notify and within what specific time frame following a breach, or no, we do not know what our breach notification requirements are. We'll leave this poll open for about 30 seconds to give you time to choose an answer. Okay, great. Troy, I'll let you take a look at the results.
Great, thanks everybody. And I'm kind of surprised that more people actually know what they do need to do. Usually that is a no is usually a higher number. It's one of those things that, like we said, we've got a number of different laws out there, and it's different for every state. And really getting to know what your requirements are is very important. So what are some of those best practices to minimize risk? And one, just having an incident response plan will help during the recovery efforts, and having processes in place to recover quickly. That's always good. Staying up to date on your notification laws, definitely very important. But I think what's really important in here is to make sure that you're vigilant in your monitoring activities and reviewing of those logs, knowing what your surroundings are. From a physical security breach, people holding the doors open for an individual and letting them into your office space. It's a huge risk. The other piece here is knowing what your critical data or assets are. That's, if you don't know what they are, it's hard to protect them. So you have to identify those, and then getting all your personnel up to speed on your controls. What do you have in place that are protecting your systems, and how do people respond to those? And kind of lastly is if you have sensitive data, then secure it and provide minimal access to it based on job requirements or responsibilities, and make sure that if you don't need that data, don't keep it around. Get rid of it, and also encrypt the data. Very, very important. Other things is to make sure that you're patching your systems on a regular basis. We see this a lot in organizations where they've got systems that they can't patch because the vendors don't allow them. So they need to have mitigating controls in place to help minimize the risk of compromise to those systems. Another big factor is the use of two-factor authentication, especially for like remote access. If people are coming in and doing like administrative stuff on your back-end systems, these could be vendors, these could be your IT administrators, but if they're remoting in from a unsecure location, then we should require some sort of two-factor authentication so that they have some other identifier than just a username and password. They have something else that we can authenticate them against. And just a kind of a reminder is that if it is on the network, it's going to be vulnerable, whether it's an internal threat or an outside hacker. That if it's got data, somebody wants that data, and it's best to try and protect that data as best as possible. With that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Troy. So these next couple of slides just kind of touches upon a data breach checklist, and this isn't an all-inclusive list, but we just wanted to point out some of the key things that an organization should be thinking about in terms of responding to a data breach. A lot of these actions here, they're going to be really guided by whether or not the organization is going to want to prosecute versus just do containment and isolation and really just kind of save their systems. So a lot of these different steps here or different things on the checklist are really kind of governed by rules of evidence. So things like securing the premises where the breach occurred to preserve evidence. You really want to isolate where you discovered the breach. If there's particular systems involved, you certainly don't want to have that area physically open to others where they could possibly influence the investigation or maybe inadvertently touch the machines that are in question or that have been compromised. So you really want to secure physically around those systems that have been compromised. Naturally interview the person who discovered the breach. Ask him or her, what time they discovered it. What were the things that set them off or really indicated that a breach had occurred. Ask about the components, the IT components that were involved, what logs they looked at, things like that Troy had alluded to earlier. Also, keep around a notebook and document everything. So, I typically request that our clients really do maintain a manual notebook, something that is actually handwritten, because at least that's something that cannot be manipulated. And if it does get manipulated, you're going to see right off the bat, whether it's erasure marks or crossouts or things like that. It's not so easy if you do it electronically because, those types of files can be manipulated. And if the attacker still has access to your network or to the particular system in question, and that's where you're maintaining a log, then, that could be subject to compromise. So document everything. Have this notebook in place where you're recording the date and the time of the breach, when it was discovered, and what your steps have been as far as your response. This last bullet on this one, choose a spokesperson for internal and external communications. I think this is very important because you certainly don't want mixed messages to go out to the public or to your stakeholders if there was indeed a breach. You want to have a central point of contact and a uniform and consistent message and a kind of a delicate flow of information that gets disclosed to your external stakeholders, just because you don't want to give out too much about the breach, particularly if the attacker is still on your environment and they're aware of your activities. So also you don't want that message to be misconstrued, and have the message be communicated like as if the sky was falling when it really is only affecting us one database, a limited amount of records, and it's really kind of inconsequential. So you want to really control the communications out there. On this one, this checklist, you certainly want to determine if you have any other security gaps or risks. So, as you're trying to isolate the where the incident occurred, finding out if you have other entry points or ingress points into the network or those systems that cause that security gap or risk. Naturally, you want to find out if that data was encrypted, the data that was stolen. And as Troy had alluded to earlier, sometimes you're mandated to encrypt data depending on if you're subject to specific regulations. Notify your legal counsel, privacy and compliance teams, and determine, if you need to notify law enforcement and who else you needs to be brought into the fray as far as discussing the data breach and as far as what to do and what the response is going to be for the organization. And then, this last bullet on here, be upfront and transparent. Certainly you don't want to appear like you're hiding anything or dumbing down or lessening the situation than it really is. Certainly you want to convey the seriousness of the issue, the impact or potential impact to the organization and to records that have been compromised. You certainly want to be upfront and transparent about that. But at the same time, you certainly don't need to let out everything and let out everything about what happened in terms of how the breach happened and if you have weak systems elsewhere, because that's probably something you want to just keep on the inside and deal with it in a quiet manner, so to speak. With that, we have our last polling question. So Katie, I'll turn this over to you to read off.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So our fourth and final polling question asks, which of the following are critical processes for incident response? We have a few options listed. Identification of all parties with access to sensitive data assets, identification and location of all PII, PHI, and other sensitive information, protocol for identifying data assets that have been breached, identification of third parties that can help in the response process, or all of the above. So just a reminder that we do require your participation in order to award CPE today. So please choose one of the options you see on your screen and click Submit. Okay, so we'll close the polls in about 5 seconds here. And Kevin, I'll let you take a look at the responses.
Thank you, Katie. So this is great. All of the above, 99.2% of you respond to all of the above, which is 100% correct. So very good. All of these particular critical processes for incident response are relevant and necessary. So very good. And with that, we just have our summary slide, and just a few points to get across here. Troy had mentioned this earlier. Stay vigilant. You want to certainly be on top of your IT environment. Things such as like knowing what your sensitive and critical data is that you need to protect, knowing what your obligations are for protecting that data, and knowing what your breach notification requirements are. Those are all things that you need to be aware of, and really kind of insert into your incident response plan. At the same time, you want to understand what threats are out there. Keep up on the news. Understand what social engineering attacks are out there. Understand how attackers get into your network, or how could they get into your network. Do things like risk assessments. Those are the types of vigilant activities that we would expect for preparing for an incident. That amount and frequency of breaches, that's just going to continue. I mean, as we've seen just from those examples earlier in the last 10 years, how many breaches have affected how many millions, hundreds of millions of records that have been compromised and transactions that have been compromised. That's just going to increase. And so, your privacy, if you think your information that's out there, your privacy and security of that information is protected, you might want to change your thinking there, because it's going to get worse before it gets any better. There's still companies that are out there, organizations that are out there who are still immature or not as sophisticated in understanding cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity awareness. And so, unfortunately, those are the types of organizations that have that low-hanging fruit that attackers love. And so, it's just something that's going to increase, something that we need to stay on top of. And really, that's coming through a lot of education, self-awareness, and certainly, just being on top of what could happen. So, with that, I'll turn it back over to Katie, and we might have some time for questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin, Troy, and Francis. We covered a lot in a very short amount of time, but looks like we do have a few minutes left to answer some of the questions that came in during today's presentation. We received many great questions about incident response plans, how to know when you're breached, we've got a lot of really engaged presenters. So if we don't have time to address each of your questions now, we'll be sure to follow up with you later today through email. So like I said, we had a number of questions come in about incident response planning. One audience member asked, how much detail is really required in an incident response plan? Troy, maybe that's something you can address for the next minute or so?
Yeah, as far as detail, the more detailed, the better. Obviously, these plans are going to be followed by individuals during an incident and responding to that. So the more detailed they are, the better off they're going to be able to follow and get systems moved off the network or do some sort of recovery effort to that system and get it back up and running and back into production, getting things going. So the more detailed they are, the better, and having kind of roles and responsibilities identified for the various individuals that are going to respond to an incident and what type of incident would that person be responsible for definitely needs to be heavily documented and with good steps outlined.
Great. Thanks, Troy. That's really helpful. I think we have time for one more. Kevin, this might be a good one for you to answer. One of our audience members asked, how often should our company test our incident response plan? So they have a plan in place, but not sure how often they should be testing that.
Yeah, that's a good question. As far as testing the incident response plan, that should just be a regular occurrence. And our recommendation is typically tested on an annual basis, just like what you do with your disaster recovery plan if you have that. You certainly don't want to go into an incident response scenario where nobody knows what their roles or responsibilities are, or nobody knows what protocol needs to be followed in order to address the incident or maybe contain the incident. So you want to have that incident response plan tested at least annually, and it could be, just really the incident response team or key individuals sitting around a table talking through a scenario and talking about what their roles or responsibilities would be at particular points in time when dealing with the incident. So, I would recommend that at least annually. However, if any changes to the environment that could contribute to the changing of the incident response plan, naturally you want to test it shortly after that as well.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And thanks again to Troy, Francis, and Kevin, and to all of our attendees. We are out of time, so going to wrap up quickly. If you have qualified for CPE as an individual attendee, your certificate will be available to download immediately following the presentation using the CPE widget on your dashboard. We'll also follow up with each of you who qualified via email within 2 weeks with an electronic version of your CPE certificate. As a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you'll need to complete the group attendance sheet in order to receive that credit. If you recall, this document and a copy of the presentation and some additional handouts on our cybersecurity services, along with an article that Kevin and Troy authored on the same topic, can all be located by clicking on the folder icon at the bottom of your screen. Some of you will be redirected after the presentation to our webcast survey, where you'll be asked to provide feedback on today's presentation. Please do take the time to complete this online survey, as your feedback is very helpful to us and in identifying future webcast topics. And that concludes today's presentation. Thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.